Chapter 23. The Garden. There was something I tried to run away from, but it won't leave me alone. Jennifer woke up Saturday morning with the sun beaming on her face. She stretched out and yawned over the back of her bed. She looked at the clock, 9:32. A tad early, no matter. She leaped out of bed and put the covers back onto it. She looked at her phone, no messages yet, except there was a voicemail. She saw that it came from Dr. Korowitz's office. Must be the test results. She stared down at her phone, and her hand trembled with anticipation. She felt much better these last few days, and even now the pain in her bones had completely subsided. She took a deep breath as she opened her voicemail to listen. "Jennifer, this is Dr. Nikolai Korowitz calling. It is important that you call the office when you get a minute. Thanks." She erased the voicemail and sat back down on her bed. She looked up at the sky as if looking up to the Lord for her guidance. "Give me strength, Father. This is hard, but not my will, but yours be done." She smiled with certainty. She scrolled through her phone to find the number for the doctor's office. She dialed it. "Korowitz's office, this is John. How may I help you?" "Hi, John. This is Jennifer Miller. I'm returning a call from Dr. Korowitz," she replied. "Sure thing. One moment." She was immediately placed on hold, and she danced to the annoying hold music with the obnoxiously loud saxophone. The music stopped, and Nikolai's thick Russian accent filled the silence. "Jennifer, are you feeling okay?" "I'm doing fine. The meds are keeping the pain down. I can walk without wobbling, and I don't feel dizzy." "That's good. So your test results came back. When can you come in for an appointment?" "Monday?" she asked. "Let me see." Jennifer could hear him typing heavily on the computer on the other end of the line, his heavy fingers hammering the keys. 2:30 p.m. work for you?" "Yes, I'll put it in my calendar." "I'll see you then." Click. She exhaled heavily. "It's not serious, not yet. No point in worrying about it right now." She exhaled deeply, letting the air decompress her lungs. Her hands relaxed as she held her phone. She went back into her phone and scrolled through to Ted's phone number. She dialed it. "Jennifer?" He immediately picked up. If Jennifer didn't know any better, she would have thought he was staring at the phone waiting for her to call him. Not that there was any reason she would. "Tedward," she smiled into the phone, filled with an overwhelming sense of felicity. "Hey, so I'm feeling much better. Are you still up to go feeding the ducks today? Ted, you're farther than me. Let's just meet outside the T at Park Street Station. We can walk to the gardens after and feed the ducks there." "Sounds like a plan. What time?" "I was thinking noonish." "I'll be there. Do you play chess?" "I used to play it frequently." His tone went low. "I'll bring my mini chessboard. I'll see you at noon." Click. Jennifer walked down on the boardwalk, walking all the way from Seaport Boulevard with her purse hanging from her side. She had her hair held back with a green headband and wore a modest yellow sundress and white sneakers. She walked briskly through the boardwalk, over the bridge and crossed the sidewalk. She welcomed the warm, gentle breeze caressing her hair as she made her way to the Boston Common. Of course, she could have just taken the T, but it was such a nice day outside with the bright sun shining down on her. There were many people about at this hour. After all, tourist season was upon them, and there were many tourists, domestic and foreign, walking the Freedom Trail and exploring many small domestic shops and antique bookstores. She walked up through Winter Street, ignoring the heavy traffic of pedestrians and street performers in the street. Winter Street was dark as it had parallel to each other tall skyscrapers. She welcomed the sunlight again as she walked across Tremont Street, welcoming the lovely view of Park Street Church on the right. She walked towards the tea stop, which was behind a concession stand run by a woman handing out cans of soda and bottles of water with the exchange of cash. She looked around her and found many people happily tossing frisbees or playing with their dogs on the grounds. She saw the gathering area filled with many round tables and folding chairs which surrounded the big fountain there, still streaming water out of its various holes and into the makeshift pool at its base. She saw the many birds of the air chirping around her, fluttering their little wings about. She heard the doors behind the tea stop open, and out came flooded people as they pushed themselves carelessly out the door, excited to see the lovely Boston Common and all the things which it had to offer. And out of that same crowd came a man, modestly dressed in shorts and dark hair with a plain T-shirt, holding a paper bag which had a large roll of bread. She giggled and hid her smile behind her hand. With her other hand she waved at him. "Oh, Tedward, that's rather a big roll you have there. I think that might be too much bread for our little ducks." "One never knows." He smiled his warm smile. She reached out with her free hand. "Come on, we have ducks to see." Ted took her hand in his, and she led him away from the hustle and bustle of the gathering area and down a path, leading upwards closer to some more of the dogs and frisbees. She led him enthusiastically down the path, skipping with her feet as they watched the squirrels scurrying up the trees with their acorns. "Tedward," she said to him, "you've shared a lot with me during the 4th of July and this week. I think it's time I tell you a little more." She smiled as he turned his head to look at her while they continued their little stroll. "You see, I got off the phone with my doctor this morning. I'm going over my results from the biopsy to confirm if I have leukemia or not, and then go over any treatment plans with my oncologist. Maybe I don't have it," she let out a smile, "and it was just an isolated incident. Maybe it isn't related to leukemia at all. If it is serious, I'll have to go for serious treatment in the long term. I just wanted you to know that. Information can be a dangerous thing, and so is trust. This was something I regrettably learned the hard way, and thank you for sharing that with me," he said as he turned his face to something else that moved behind a tree, like eyes were watching him. "I'll try my best not to betray your trust in me." Of course he'd say that. Information is a tool to him. That's how he's lived his entire life. A paradox, wouldn't you say? Her eyes dropped to cover half of her eyeball as they walked, and finally reached the end of the common, to the entrance to the Boston Public Garden. The black gate was open, and the pathway on the other side of the street was pleasantly shaded by trees. "You can trust me, but you don't. And you can't trust me, but you do." His eyes continued to scan the pathway. "I knew you'd say something like that, but if that was the case, you wouldn't have warned me of the potentially harmful nature of giving part of myself to you. Of course, I feel I know you much better after this week, and quite frankly, I don't think we've seen more of each other than this week at all. Seriously, Tedward, it is like pulling your teeth out to get you to hang out with me. Well, I must say, I'm pleasantly surprised that you actually started this, although I did talk you into picking me up at the hospital. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm trying to be better." He stared down at the ground. "Don't try to be better, Tedward, try to be you. That's really all we can be." "Right." His tone dropped. "Tedward, I heard that." She snapped at him as the light changed as they proceeded to walk across the crosswalk. "Hmm?" He turned his head towards her. "Your tone dropped. What's wrong?" "You know what, Ted, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. I take it back, I should be asking that question, but please don't feel pressurized to answer." He sighed as they entered through the gate. "No, you're right. I appreciate you asking. Just that particular thing is something I struggle with because I don't really know who I am. Part of my job was espionage. If you put me in Russia, Italy, or any other country, I have been able to assume identities. You know, you seem to be very experienced for being so young. How old did you say you were?" 25, he replied softly. "Sam thought you might be 23. She squeezed his hand tighter. "Sorry, the truth is I don't know how old I am. It's complicated. I don't know when I was born or where. That is really all I can say about it." "I see." She spoke softly as she tightened her grip on his hand. "How is the sleep?" "Still the same. Only 30 minutes, he replied as they continued to walk through the gardens, watching the trees and the beautiful lake with flocks of ducks paddling about in the waters. "I still see the nightmares, and they aren't going away. I don't expect them to." They will, she assured him as they drew closer to the lake. She found a bench and pulled him down to it so they could be closer to the water. He ripped off a piece of the bread roll and handed it to her. She sniffed the bread and started pulling a little piece off and tossed it on the ground. A small flock of ducks started waddling out of the lake. Ted ripped off a piece and tossed it to the flock. "Did you have friends? In the service, I mean." She ripped off a little piece and placed it in her hand and leaned down to some brown ducklings to feed off of. "The only friends and family I had were those I immediately worked with. I didn't see much of anyone else. There were 15 of us." Sighing, he ripped off another piece of bread and tossed it a little closer to the bench as more ducklings flocked towards them. "One of them I got real close with, and I proposed. She died. They all did." "Did you ever have closure with them and their families?" She exhaled heavily as she tore off little pieces of bread and littered over the ground. "No. The only family any of us had was one another. I suppose you could say we were all picked up from the same cloth. We were never on speaking terms with our families, for good or ill." He kept tossing more bread to the ducks. "In many ways, we were the only family we ever had." "And are you on speaking terms with your family now?" She turned to him as she continued to rip bread up in little pieces. "No." His tone dropped. "I'm sorry for probing." She placed her free hand on his shoulder. She took her pieces and tossed it in the air and let them fall down like snow to the ducks. The flocks of ducks became larger around them. There were white ducks, brown ducks, mallards with their green heads as they picked up the bread from the ground and quacked and waited for the next one. "Why did you join?" He sighed as he tossed aside his last piece of bread. "I suppose you could say I was forced into it. I was groomed, you see, to fight, and was pushed to pursue a career in the military. That's all I wish to say about that, but what I will say is why I continued to fight. I continued to fight, despite knowing full well what it was doing to me. With every life I took brought pain and regret, as if my heart was being torn to pieces inside my chest. But I kept fighting because I was promised that if I kept doing it, the world would be safer once the foreign powers were left at bay. I killed, and I killed, and I killed. I killed without halting. I killed until at last I stopped caring and became an empty, hollow husk. And at last my hope came true. There was peace for a time. Now that doesn't seem to matter anymore, with NATO disbanding and all that. All my hard work was worthless." "Of course, all the wars stopped a decade ago, and you're responsible for that, but then you should be older. To be responsible for global peace, and now after all this time to watch it crumble must be a punch in the face." "The world will be a darker place now because of it, that's certain," Jennifer replied. "But no one man should ever have to bear that burden alone. Not you, not anyone. No one should carry it by themselves. You should not have been held responsible for that. As you can see, the peace was very short-lived. Don't get me wrong, the peace was great while it lasted, and I think you might be closer to my age, if not older than me, Ted. My entire adult life I've lived in world peace, and it is now crumbling, but knowing what I know now, no man should be forced to carry that burden alone." "Yeah, you're right, but unfortunately that doesn't change the past." His voice became barely audible. "No, but we can move forward, and you aren't serving anymore. It's not your problem, not your responsibility." She tossed her last piece of bread on the ground and leaned into his shoulder. "Tedward, who am I to you?" He leaned his head atop hers. "My friend."